In this video, I'm going to talk about how to set up your worksheets so they're ready for printing. And as in a lot of things with Excel, there's multiple ways to do this. I'm going to start out showing the page layout ribbon, and then we have three groups: the page setup, scale to fit, and the sheet options right here. You can open up a dialog opener, and all of these buttons can also be accessed within this dialog box. So again, a couple ways to access things. Let's just start with margins. There's some preset margins, and then if you hit custom margins, it's going to open up that dialog box in the margin window. And right here, you can change the numbers to whatever you want. An important feature on here is the center on page horizontally and vertically. And so I actually put this on some exams. And what this is for is if you're printing a small spreadsheet, so you just have a little bit of data, and you don't want the data just to be in the top left corner of the page, you can center it horizontally across the page and or vertically up and down on the page. And so again, typically used when you just have a small amount of data and you don't want it in that top right corner. So that's where those buttons are. Let me hit cancel on this. Page orientation, portrait or landscape, you can make that choice right here, or page setup, it would be right here, portrait and landscape. And then the size, the paper size, I don't ever mess with this very often, the print area. So let's say I just want to print this data right here, or I'll run over to the grade, but I don't necessarily need to see the grading policies. And so if you only want to print a particular portion of the sheet, you can set the print area. And so now we have just set that print area. In the page setup dialog box, that is going to be over here in the sheet tab. So notice this print area, A2 to L12. And so very often I'll do it over here, because when you do it here, it's kind of hard to tell. Oh, I guess they do put a little dark border around that. But for me, I always like to run over to this page setup dialog box. So I open the dialog opener, I go to the sheet, and then right here, print area, basically what they're asking at that point, if you put your cursor in there, is you select the cells. Notice that because we had set up the print area, it's calling it the print area. If we want to get rid of that, obviously I can come here and just hit delete and OK, or right here you can say clear the print area, and it would accomplish the same thing. Now let's talk about print titles. So let me move to another spreadsheet for an example. Let's say you have a lot of data, and if when we print this, I want these titles to show on every page, right? Because if I'm further down in the data, I don't know what the column headings are. So what we'll do is go to this dialog opener. If you hit this button, it accomplishes the same thing. We come here to the sheet. We just talked about the print area. The print title is about rows to repeat on the top of every page. So again, let's assume we're being portrait. I will click on row 5, and then that will show up on the top of every page. You may run into a situation where I need these names to show up on every page. So for instance, if this were to break in the middle of the data, all of a sudden on a page I have the column base salary, bonus, and sick days, but I don't know who they belong to. So sometimes I need, in this case, maybe two columns. Whoops, not through J. That's from having a, I'm just going to make that, I'll type it column B to repeat on every page. And now when I go to print preview, I can see here's one page, and then notice it's going to print 39 pages. When I scroll over, notice I do have a report date, hire date, days of employment on that page. And anyway, you just keep going. If I go far enough down, here are the first name, last name, and then we have the base salary, bonus, sick days, and performance rating. So that's having rows repeat at the top and columns also to repeat. So it's a pretty handy feature. I've used that a lot if you're printing a lot of data. Also, let's go talk about the page break thing right here. When you go into print preview, it'll leave a dotted line in your spreadsheet showing where the page breaks are. And if I scroll down far enough, you'll see a page break right here. And there's no way to get rid of them. It's just showing you where they're at. But if you want to change where those are at, you can click on a particular cell and say, you know what, I'm going to insert a page break right here. And so now I have a page break there. And then, of course, it will put in the dotted line for the other page breaks. Another place to do that is right here in the lower right. You have a page break preview button. And when you click on that, you can see the various lines of where things are going to page break. And you can use your cursor to move them up. If you move them down, you have to be careful. Up on this ribbon, notice we have a scale at 100%. So it's going to print all of the text and everything that what you'd expect, 100%. If you start moving these page breaks way down and asking to put more on a page than Excel is normally wanting to do, it will scale your spreadsheet so it starts printing a little bit smaller. And I've had situations where I'm like, oh, cool, I need to add a little bit more data to each page. Well, it scaled it so small, once it printed, it was basically, you couldn't read it. It was just, the print was so small. So be careful about moving your page breaks to include more data. That's doable, but then you always have to check that scale to see if you aren't, making the font so small it'll be, you can't read it. If you feel like you've messed up all the page breaks, you can hit this button and just say, oh yeah, let's just reset them all. Notice my scale goes back to 100%. And then if I want to get out of this view, lower left, I'll just go back to a normal view. Anything else? If you want to add a background image to your document, you can choose one from File or do an image search or wherever you want to get your image. And it'll put it as a background image on the page. I haven't used that very often. And then right here, you can say, you know what, in this case, let me go back to my other spreadsheet. I think it would work a little better on, was it display formula spreadsheet? So on this one, let's say I change the orientation to landscape, and I do notice I'm going to be just a little bit off. These two columns won't show up. And so I'm like, you know what, I need this to fit one page wide. And so that's basically moving that page break. And notice what the scale did again. It went to 86%. So just a warning, be careful in doing that because it might make the print so small. But right here under that scale to fit is you can change the width, or you can say, this has to be one page tall, which in this case it probably would have been anyway. The other place we could do this without the buttons is under page setup. Right here is where you can fit to one page wide, one page tall, and then it will automatically change the scale. I mentioned earlier that there are several places to be able to change these settings. If you go to File, Print, which by the way, I'll come back out, you can also get there by Control P. So File, Print will open up this window, and then right here is where you choose your printer. What do you want to print? So normally if you just hit print, it's going to print the active sheet that you were on, but you can say, hey, print the entire workbook, or just print what I have selected. So that's another way to kind of set a print area, is select it first and then come here and just say, oh yeah, just print my selection. If your printer's set up for it, you can do double-sided. Here's where you can change your orientation, your paper, your margins, fit on one page. You can change basically that scaling we messed with a second ago on the very far bottom right, or if you can see my cursor in the bottom right, you can show the margins as lines, and now you can drag these around if you want. And then this is zoom to page button also down here on the right. I tend not to use this view as much as what we were just on with the ribbon, the page setup ribbon, which by the way you can get to by clicking page setup, and now we're on that dialog box, which again has all of the buttons that we're interested in right here. As long as I have it open, we went to the Sheet tab. A couple of other settings are, do you want to see the grid lines or not? And so you have to decide if that's going to be helpful. Does it black and white? Do you want to see the row and column heading? So do you want to see the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s in here? Do you want to see if the cell has an error in it? Do you want to display that? So those are what those settings are for. And then your page order. Where do you want 1, 2 up and down, or do you want 1, 2 left and right? So how do you want it to print? I'm going to hit cancel. Let's get out of here and go back to page layout. The settings that we just messed with about grid lines are right here. Whether you want to print, or right here is viewing them in the worksheet, but do you want to print them? And the same thing with the headings. You can turn those off. I don't do that very often, but do you want to print them? Is a checkbox right there. The last thing we'll talk about is inserting a header or footer in your worksheets. There's two ways to do it. I find that students prefer this way, so you have a normal layout button and then you have a page layout button down here. When you click on page layout, you can see the header. It's in 3 pieces, and if you scroll down on your page, you can see the footer. So there's a left, middle, and right piece to your footer. Then the header and footer has its own ribbon, right? A context-sensitive ribbon. And then right here are buttons for inserting certain things. And in this class, when I ask you to put in a page number or the sheet name or the file name, I'm asking you to use these buttons. Every once in a while, so this sheet name is called Display Formulas, I'll get a user or a student who will just type it, Display Formulas. Well, the problem with that is if you rename this sheet, this is going to be wrong, right? So you have these buttons, and one of them is sheet name. And it puts this code &tab, which means it will display the tab name no matter what it is. The same thing for date. If I want to put the date, I'll use the button date. If you want to put a page number, you can put the &page. So use those buttons when you can, which is most of the time. If you need to put your name, go ahead, you'd have to type that. Another thing about page numbers is you can also put in a page number of, type the word of, and then number of pages. So this would say 1 of 4, 2 of 4, 3 of 4, things like that. So you can add your own strings to the information. The other button I use quite frequently is the file name. So that, notice it uses that code again, &file, but it will use the file name in the footer is what I'm in right now. And so if your boss says, hey, we need to make some changes, you can remember the name of the file so you can go and fix it. You can also do file and path. And so let me get rid of the file name. And this button will do the path, where is it located, and the file name, which is kind of handy if you can't remember where you saved it. Another button is that you may want a different first page header and then some different odd and even pages. So the very first page of your workbook, so this is the first page footer, and if I scroll up, this will be the first page header. And then if we were printing on different pages, you may want something different. An example of this is maybe you want your company logo inside the first page header, but not on every page. And so you can have a different first page, and you can use this picture button to add a picture in the header right there. And finally, having showed all of the different ways, or all of these different buttons, there are some predefined headers. So you can just choose like this, and it will put that information in for you. Notice it's using page and then it uses the page button, and this one will just be the workbook name. When you're done creating your headers and footers, you can click out of them, and then you can go back to page layout view. And notice you don't see them when you're in page layout view. You'll see them when you print, or you'll see them in this view or a print preview view. You'll also see them, but normally in your normal view, you don't notice that you have headers and footers in your document. The second way to add headers and footers is that page layout, the page setup dialog box, and you have an entire tab dedicated to headers and footers. And if you click on custom footer, now I've got quite a mess going here. I'll go and hit delete and delete, but those same buttons that we had in the ribbon are available right here. And so here's where I can insert a page number, type the word of, and hit the page numbers. Over here, I can put the date, or whoops, that was the wrong one at the time. Anyway, you get the idea. Same buttons here as that were in the ribbon. I can hit OK. Right here is your different first page buttons, and then you can go to custom header and fix things up here also. So either place will accomplish the same thing, and it's when you're in print previews that you'll notice or you'll see your header and footer being displayed. Whew, I think that's it. Everything you ever needed to know about setting up your pages for printing.